All right, we can get going. So I've started the recording. All right. Hi everyone. This is Jitin here, and we have Nishant and Andres. So this is our another virtual event from Mumbai Java user group. So today we have a privilege to speak with Andres. So I'll introduce a little bit about Andres, right? So he's been a Java and a GUI developer and a Java champion for more than 20 years of experience with software design and development. He's currently a founding member of Griffin Framework and Hacker Garden community event. You can reach out to him on at Almiray. And outside technology, he likes to spend time with his wife and when he's not hacking around. And yeah, so today's topic is basically he's gonna do a live session on how to build and deploy applications to the cloud. Apart from this, the session is being organized in association with an early stage startup in Pune called Capitex. They are into they help companies track their account receivables, where they can thereby they can unlock the cash faster. So yeah, with that, Andres, I'll give it to you to start the session, and we will take the questions on the chat, and in between we'll keep it interactive. So feel free to mute and unmute when you have questions, and we get going. All right, Andres, all yours.
All right. Thank you very much for that introduction, Jitin, and Nishan as well for organizing this virtual meetup. I wish I was able to be there in presence with everybody else, although, well, situation nowadays is quite different now.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, at some point, I will be make it back to Mumbai. I've been there before once. It's an incredible place, really good vegetarian options. I'm a vegetarian, so I'd love to go back at some point.
Nice. Yeah, yeah.
Anyway,
Once the virus scare is out, we will definitely make Nishant and myself. We are planning to make many more sessions this year. I'm planning to fly back to Mumbai, so definitely we'll keep it more, and we'll be more than happy to get you.
right. Well, again, thank you very much for everything. And so, as Jitan said, if you have any questions, please raise them in the chat, and I will try to address them as soon as possible. If not, then we'll still have some time at the end of the session to address all those questions that you may have. So now I'm gonna switch to the slides, and before I do that, I need to share the screen. There we go. And then let's play this. All right. So I think that the slides are showing right now.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So, so my name is Andres Almiray, and I work for Oracle. And so part of the introduction has already been done. So this is the boring slide about myself, which the only thing that I want to say is that I like and I love sharing knowledge and when anything that happens to that is related to open source, which is surprisingly one of the things that we're going to see today. Now, because I work for Oracle, this is something that I must say, and so here's the safe harbor statement. Anything that I said about the what may be upcoming from the releases for the company or whatever it is related to the company, you just have to take it with a grain of salt. Don't make any purchase or any future decisions based on what I say. Anyway, so this is the current landscape of what we have when you want to develop applications on the web, specifically if you want to target cloud technologies or microservices. Now, there are a bunch of frameworks out there, and perhaps the most popular one at this point in time is Spring Boot. And this can be seen as a full stack framework because it provides everything that you need, everything that you wish for, and there are so many different options that you can use to combine. But compared with the other options, it may be seen as too heavyweight. So there are other options that are more lightweight. For example, those are based on microprofile, for which there are several implementations. There is Open Liberty from IBM, there is Payara, Thorntail, and of course, Helidon from Oracle as well. You might have heard of Quarkus from Red Hat. They also implement the microfile specification. And then we go to the tiniest frameworks out there. For example, Javelin This is, well, it was originally implemented in Java, and then they moved to Kotlin, if I'm not mistaken. There's a Spark, which should not be confused with Apache Spark. That's a completely different project related to Hadoop. And then there's also Micronaut. If you ever heard of Grails, well, the makers of Grails decided to launch Micronauts 2 years ago or so, which well, not supposedly, it actually has a lot of features that you find in Quarkus, but Micronaut came out first. And then Quarkus can be also seen as the tiniest framework. And there is another version of Helidon that, that can be used in the smallest possible fashion. Now, it doesn't matter which one of these you choose, or if you decide to use a different framework, when talking about deploying to the cloud, just pick one. Now, some of the capabilities required by these frameworks, which could be the amount of memory usage or CPU, will definitely affect the build times that you have in your cloud. So you have to do a balance between how many different features you need for a particular framework versus how much is going to actually impact you in terms of your build, your cloud build. Anyway, for the purpose of this presentation, I chose, if I'm not mistaken, the Spark, because the application itself, the framework itself that I'm going to choose is not important. That's not the message that I want you to take home. You pick whatever is needed. What I want you to look at is how we're going to deploy to the cloud specifically. Okay, let's move to the next one. In the case of Oracle, we do have a cloud business, surprisingly. And in September of last year, 2019, there was announced a new tier, which is called the Always Free tier. This allows you to have always access to the following resources, and you don't have to pay a dime for it. It's completely free for you, and you can keep it for as long as you want. You have access to 2 virtual machines with just 1 CPU and 1 GB of memory. You have access to the full autonomous database with 20 GB of storage. This is not a watered down version of the product. This is the full product itself. So think about that. Then you also have access to block volumes in terms of 100 gigabytes total. So this is what you want to use as space for your virtual machines. And you also have access to a load balancers and archive storage and the object storage if you want to use something compatible with the Amazon file system. And at the very least, you still have a limit of 10 terabytes of data transfer per month. If you are within these limits, if the kind of applications that you need to build that you want to polish are within these limits, then you're good to go. Now, if you want to take an opportunity of using this cloud, then just go to oracle.com/cloud/free, sign up for free, and you have access to, I believe, the standard subscription when you start is 300 credits to use all services for 30 days. You just give it a full trial for everything. And after your credits are expired or the 30 days pass, then you revert back to what is known as the Always Free, and you have access to those services that I described before, forever. Okay, so say that you already have an account like that. Now, the next step is, you might remember that I said, I love open source, and I love to talk about open source. And typically, open source and Oracle are 2 things that you do not associate with one another, right? Well, let me tell you that Oracle actually is investing in open source. If you go to github.com/Oracle, you will see that there are quite close to 200 projects already, if not a bit more, on different things that Oracle has already put out in the open. Helidon is being one of them, of course, but we also have something that is called the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, OCI for short, which is something that I'm going to use nowadays. And there is a different versions of the SDK, which allows you to talk to the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure with different languages. We have 4 options right now. The Python SDK, Java, of course, Go, and Ruby. So we're going to have a look at the Java SDK. And this is the one that, well, you use the Java language to talk to OCI. You can build your own applications that talk to OCI. For example, you can create a new autonomous database and start working it within your own application. Or maybe what you want to do is use the object storage to push data or retrieve data from the cloud, create instances, or do whatever is needed as long as you have access to all the services. Now, this SDK is dual license. On the universal premises license, this is an Oracle license, and the Apache software license too, which means that you are free to use this SDK pretty much as you deem fit. You can use it in an open source environment, or you can use it in a commercial environment. It's up to you to decide which one you want to use, because both licenses give you access to this.
So Andres, one question quickly about licenses. So where can they find the link to go over the licenses if they're using one of these, right? So to get more details of what is permitted under these licenses.
On the project website, in the README, there should be a link to the University per Civil license, and well as Apache software license is one of the requirements. If there happens to be no link, then just Google open source license, or go to, is it OSI.org, the open source initiative.
Okay.
And you should find a link to all these licenses. And well, when dealing with the little print or the small print of all the licenses, we as engineers are not really good at it. It's very good that if you talk to a lawyer in case that you have any questions, especially when you want to do commercial software.
Commercial software, yeah. Okay.
Yes, so be sure to have some sort of counsel with this.
Yep. Sounds good. All right. Cool. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. So the README for the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Java SDK is a bit thin. I have to confess that, but it does have a few links that help you understand what's going on. So there is a link there that says getting started, which requires you to have some setup, some configuration in order to make use of the API, which is something that I'm going to show right away. And also there's a link to the configuration in terms of the source code. There's a link to a bunch of examples that are run every time that we make a release, so that we verify that examples are still working correctly. And these are very good for studying what you can do with the API. In terms of the documentation, there is the reference to the API or the Java doc, and some of the prerequisites. And if you get stuck, well, I'm not so sure if there's still a mailing list, but you can definitely send a message through the GitHub issues page that the project has. The latest release actually is not 195. The OCI Java SDK makes releases almost every 2 weeks, if not it's every week. So the current version is actually 1.13.2. It was released just a few days ago. So when I took this screenshot, was a little bit, it's a bit old. And in this page, you will see all the different releases and what it was new coming on in each one of these releases. And if you want to download the zip file or just clone the repository, well, you know what to do. If you download the zip file, then you get the structure that looks like this one. And what is important here is that inside the lib directory, you get the final jar. And in the third-party lib directory, you get all the dependencies. This was before there was actually a BOM file, a Maven BOM file, which is now the preferred way for consuming the API if you want to build your own applications. There's also the link to the API docs or Java docs, and the source code for all the examples, so you can study it in local instead of browsing it through the net. And the documentation, the latest version of the documentation, they explain how you can make use of the BOM file, which is something that I have that I will show also. So the Java doc is, well, it looks very much like any other Java doc out there. It contains a list of all the services. There is an incredible amount of services that you have access to, and all of them are grouped together based on the package. For example, here we can see there is analytics, and it has a sub-package for model requests and responses. These are just the collaborator classes that you would have to use in case that you interact with the API directly, or if not, then most of the times what you're going to see is just the services classes. Now here's a link. This is how the examples look like. These examples may look a bit different now. Again, latest release is 1.13.2. Some of these examples are a bit old. They don't need any changes, and some others have been retouched for the latest releases to keep up with the latest versions of the API. So whenever you see a new release of the OCI Java SDK and you want to keep tabs on it, it would be a good idea to look back into this particular page in the examples to figure out if there have been any updates on the examples that you're using, or there's a new example based on a brand new services that has just become available.
So, Andres, one question. So, I know that OCI Java SDK always do they promise to be always backward compatible with versions of Java going forward? Will it always be like that, or there'll be any concerns that we have to keep in mind in terms of when we are building this?
Well, so far, the API is compatible with the, if you leave, it's all the way to, if it's Java 7.
Okay.
I cannot foresee if there will be in a future version of Java. So the latest version that is about to come out in 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, is JDK 14.
Right, right.
If there happens to be a new version of OCI that says we need a specific version of the JDK, they have two choices. The team will have to make a decision here whether they will produce multi-release jars, which is still something that is compatible with versions of JDK 8 and 7. So that way, you as a consumer only have to configure a single jar, or in this case, a single POM file.
Okay.
Or they use classifiers and they produce, or it's not classifiers, or they use additional artifact IDs, and they will have to increase the number of artifacts that are published out. So you have to be sure that to pick the right one. Again, right now, I'm not aware of any changes that will prompt the OCI team to go with one or the other.
Okay.
But whichever they choose, I hope they pick the one that it's the least disruptive to your current workflow.
Correct. Okay, makes sense. Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So let's see about this configuration. This is something that was not just because I did it. I wrote this thing myself, but actually I was able to test it. And I'm in broadcasting from a brand new computer. Well, it was brand new a few months ago. And the first time that I did this presentation, I had all the configuration on another computer. And then when I noticed that everything was missing, I scrambled to put everything together. I followed the instructions that you're going to see today. And I was able to replicate the configuration in less than 10 minutes. Well, a little bit because I knew what to do, but because the instruction tells me exactly what needs to be done. So this is definitely battle tested. So the first thing that you have to do, if you go to this particular URL that you see on the top, is the documentation on getting started. And this is one of the links that you see in the OCI Java SDK in terms of the configuration. This tells you that you need, the best way to do the configuration is to have a file that contains the following entries. You have to have the user, your tenancy ID, the default region, in case that I register in Europe, so my default region is Frankfurt. This was because when I created my account, we didn't have a data center in Zurich, which I'm living in Switzerland. So that's where I decided to use Frankfurt. So another thing that OCI is doing, or at least the Oracle Cloud is doing, is deploying new data centers around the world. So you'll see that coming up in a few months. And a few more things about the fingerprint and the password and the key file. This is for configuring your secure shell and your private keys, that you can talk to the OCI in a secure manner. Now, the best way for you to configure the OCI is to create a file that looks like this, instead of every single time that you want to access the services, passing all this information. That URL up there tells you all the steps that you need to follow, but this is what you need to do in order to get the user, the tenancy, and the fingerprint. So follow these steps. Well, actually, this is how you would do if you want to, this is how you use the API in the configuration. There are many ways to create a configuration object. The default file name for the configuration is config, located in your userhome.oci folder. Of course, you can change this location if you need to. Once you have that file and you use the default profile, or you can have as many profiles as you want. I'm going to use the default one. Just parse that file and pass it to a provider, and then this thing will know how to look into the information that is found in that particular file. Once you do, you create a client or you create a service, and then you have access to that particular service. In this case, this code is showcasing how you can configure and start a resource search client. So if you have an account And if you log into the console, the URL may be different depending on your region. If you look at the URL at the top, it has the region Frankfurt, which is my default home region. But if you happen to have a region in Asia or somewhere around the world, then the console URL may look a little bit different. Regardless of that, the dashboard looks very similar. On the left-hand side on the top, you see the hamburger menu. With this, you can see different resources. Excuse me. We have some default actions such as create a new VM instance. So that's a shortcut for action that you can see on the hamburger menu later. On the top right, you see information about yourself. What is your home region? And in this case, again, is Frankfurt. Some data about your billing and announcements. And there's a button here on the top about your username. This is where you can get information about your username and your tenancy. So let's have a look at that configuration. So the first thing you need to know is your user ID. Your user ID can be found the following way. You click on the hamburger menu and scroll down all the way down, and you see an option called identity. And then you click on users, and you get something that looks like this. You get the name with the URL, the email address that you used to register your account. And in this case, I just pixelate that. And the important thing is that OCI ID. You can show it and copy it manually, and just click on copy and you get that value. And then you paste that value into the config file. Where? The config file, this one, and you substitute for user ID. Of course, I'm not going to show my full user ID because I do have passphrase. But the only thing that you do is just paste the values over. So we just found the first one. Yes.
Anyways, I have a question. So if I have a standard application like FATJAR file, can I push that application, web application or FATJAR without having this configuration file, or it is mandatory to have this configuration in place?
Well, yes, you could, because the only thing that you need to have access to the VM is a secure copy or secure shell. So you would have to have configure your instance to receive secure copy credentials. You have to have the port 22 open. This is not open by default. This is part of the things that you need to do to configure here in the console. And you have to have access to your secure shell configuration in order to make it happen. But other than that, it's just copy files on this. You also will need to open some other ports if you want to interact. This is something that I'm also going to show here. Per se, for deploying itself, you don't require access to the API, but you will require access to the API to do some, or to automate some other activities to make sure that you can do all the for full deployment.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. So we got one value here was a user. The next one will be the tenancy ID, which we can get it from two places. Actually, you need a tenancy ID to log into the console, but if in case that you forget about that name, then you can get it again for scrolling all the way down from the hamburger menu. There's administration tenancy details. Or if you click in the user icon on the top right, then you see that as the name tenancy Almiray in my case. You click on either of those two, and now we get also the access to that OCI ID. You can copy it and paste it on the file. Now we get two elements. So the next one will be the secure shell key. For this, there are many ways to generate it, depending if you're on Linux or Mac or Windows, depending on your platform. So the link out there will give you all the details that you need to follow in order to do this. You use Jenkey or OpenSSL. The instructions may vary from platform, so I'm not going to replicate those here on the presentation. Just follow that link, and the steps to create this file are always up to date and refreshed. So just make sure that you follow the steps. And once you do, well, if you want, you can give it a passphrase or not. In my case, I decided to give it a passphrase. And you must upload these keys with the console. This is something that you can do again as part of the, when you go to your user ID, there's a button there that says update public API keys, and then just click on that one, upload your key, and there you're done. Or you'll see a better way to do this in just a moment. So there's your username. You click add public key, And once you paste your user key, then you see an entry for that particular user key called the fingerprint. And this is the other value that we need to put in the OCI configuration file. With this, I think that we're done with everything that we need to configure. So you can either use the API directly, or you can consume the API through a series of plugins, especially if you use build tools. So I'm going to showcase the Gradle build plugin first, but let me tell you already that there is also a Maven plugin. Now, there are some reasons why I like to showcase Gradle in the first case, is because the way that data can flow from let's say Maven terms, from one goal to another, in this case from Gradle, from one task to another, is easier because Gradle tasks are able to pass values around depending on the inputs and outputs. So in the case of Maven, at some point you will have to modify the POM file in order to read some values, or the Maven plugin will have to be updated in such a way that it can read these values automatically for you, which is something that it doesn't do right now. So let me show you what we're gonna have here. So the reason to use a plugin like this one is because you're already using a Maven, you're already using a build tool, whether it's Maven, Gradle, or something else, to build your application. Again, doesn't matter if it's a Spring Boot or Micronaut or Quarkus, whatever it is, Helidon. So you use this build tool to compile, test, assemble, and deploy the application, most likely, right? I don't expect someone to just use the IDE or do things by hand nowadays. Gradle has excellent support for speed and build times. This is something that Gradle does, so it can calculate the inputs and outputs of every task that you run. So for example, compile is a task and test is a task. So you don't have to reissue the same or recalculate the same values over and over again. This is something that Gradle is good at. It also has support for multiple languages. In the case that which is important for us is Java. And of course, the Oracle Cloud supports Java because I just showed the Java SDK. The latest version of the OCI Gradle plugin is actually version 0.3.0. It does not support yet every single service that is out there supported by or provided by the OCI. It only supports the minimum set of services so that you can interact and create instances, which is something that we're going to see today. You have two choices to apply the Gradle plugin. You can do the old way, which is option 1, which this is since Gradle started in version 0.4, I think they added support for plugins in a better way until Gradle 2.1. And after that, then you can use version 2. So either you go with this way. It's a bit verbose, but it allows you to define exactly which version and from which repository you want to download something in case that you have a custom artifact. Or you can use just this way that works with the Gradle plugin button. It's very simple, very concise, and either way will work. So now let me show you a demo of this. I'm going to get out of the presentation and then move to my IDE. Now let's make it smaller so that I can see. So here I have a very simple project. It's called Basic. And this basic project has, let me make this a bit bigger so everybody can see it. I have a Gradle file that applies different plugins. The important one here is this version, the OCI Gradle plugin that allows me to interact with the cloud. This particular application it relies on Spark Java, so you can see the dependency right here in Spark Java, certain version right there. I'm going to use the shadow plugin so that I can create a fat jar, so that I can create a single jar with all dependencies and I deploy this fat jar. The rest of the plugins, these are standard Gradle, one for defining that I'm building a Java project and also building an executable jar with this one. And finally, this is regarding the question of deployment. If I need SDK to deploy to the IBM, no, you actually don't. You only need secure shell or secure copy. So I'm going to use this plugin called Sugar that allows me to secure copy to any server that I have access to. In terms of the build file itself, there's the repository where I can consume dependencies. I'm going to use Spark Java and SLF4j for running. There's the main class of my application is come acme application. If you're interested a bit about Spark Java, oh no, this is not the one, is here, right here. The application has a single endpoint called hello. You do a get on hello and it returns hello world. It's as trivial as this. There's nothing more to the application than this. As said, the application right now is not very important. So what we have later here, let's move it this way, is a series of tasks that these are belonging to the OCI Gradle plugin. This task, which I decide to name step 1, it could be any name you want, is the one that will allow me to create an instance on the fly with certain parameters. These parameters you see here are very similar to the ones that you will see when you go to the console and create a VM instance. It will let you pick, well, we'll have to, well, now you can see how I can log in, but you won't see my password because it's already saved. Nice. Okay, so I click here on the create VM instance and suggest a name. The name that I'm going to pick in my build file is going to be sample01. You can pick an operating system. The default one is Oracle Linux 7.7, released on certain date, or you can change and say, for example, you have access to a lot of different VM types, but I'm gonna go with the default. In my case, I have 3 different options for placing my VM in availability domain. I'm gonna pick the first one. I wanna make it a virtual machine. The different shapes that I have access to, remember, you have access to 1 core, and in this case, I do have a better access. So I have a different kind of account. I have more memory. But if you were to have access to the free tier, and I think it's in, oops, I just click escape. I didn't create anything. So let me click over there again, create. And if I pick this one, I think I may have access to other VM shapes. Not necessarily. Well, that's all right. And you have additional options as well. Just go with defaults most of the time, so you should be able to go. This is very important right here, the last option. If you do not supply your secure shell key files, you won't be able to log into your VM instance. So you may configure as many things as you want, but you have to kind of know what you want to do. And you have to be sure that you don't forget a few things. If you go back to the builder file, we can see that we're going to use a compartment ID. Compartment IDs are just like logical groups of resources, and any resource in the cloud could be an instance, a subnet, a virtual network, as a console connection, or could be the object storage. It's just something that allows me to group out resources. So you have to be sure that you have a compartment, which actually you do. You always start with a default compartment, so you can look at identity compartments. And there's a top level compartment here, in this, my case, the name of my username, root. And you see, I have created a handful of compartments, and I'm going to use this one, samples. If I were to look at the contents of samples, and let's show this ID, this long ID here, it's exactly the same ID that I have here in my build direct file. So that's the value that I'm going to use. Now I'm going to give it a name, sample1, the image, shape, the location to the public key file, and finally, something called cloud init, which is quite standard in many cloud providers. In my cloud init script looks like this. What I'm going to do with this one is install Java 8 and make sure that I have port 4567 available in the, or visible in the firewall. This is the default port that Spark Java uses to communicate. So if I do this, then I'm going to bootstrap the VM with certain settings. So I'm making sure that I have Java, and if the application is running, then I'll be able to look into it. So the first step will create an instance. The second thing that we need to do is use another task to make sure that this port 4567 is visible. So it's one thing to say to the firewall, I want this port to be open, but another thing is to tell the instance, I can definitely want this port to be open, and this is something that you can do with this particular task. Then we configure secure shell options. This is part of the Sugar plugin. You can do this in the build, or you can do it by hand. It's up to you. Just making sure that it has access to the secure shell information pertaining to my username. And then I had 2 additional tasks related to Sugar. The first one will copy the fat jar to a particular destination. So this is the actual deployment. And at step 4, what it's going to do is run the application. So I'm going to execute a remote command. You can see here, first, because we don't know how many times we're going to do this, the first thing they're going to do here is find if there is a Java process running. If there is, I'm going to kill it. I'm assuming that in my VM, the only Java process that should be running is a previous version of my application. So I don't want to start the application if it's already, well, I want to make sure that the application is not running before I want to run it again. So that's the whole reason to do this. This is completely separate from OCI. This is just a standard Java processes. And then just run the jar because it happens to be an executable jar. Okay, so now I'm gonna turn into the terminal and make this work. So the first thing that I'm going to do is run, well, I'm going to do a clean to make sure that nothing is there. Perfect. So now I'm going to run step 1. And this will create a new instance and create a new subnet and all the resources that I need. Remember the name, sample 1. Let's look at my current set of instances. I have sample 3, 5, and 2, and these are terminated. These are currently not running. So I'm going to execute step 1, and we'll see some information coming out here. It starts to create the virtual connection networks and internet gateways, the subnets. It created the instance, and now the build file is waiting for the instance to be in an available state, so it's finally running. If I go turn here into the console and do a refresh, I should see an instance in a yellow icon, meaning that is being provisioned. Just give it a moment, and there is sample 1 currently being provisioned. If we were to look at the boot volumes and the networks and everything else, these resources they have, some of them may be already in green, and some will still be in yellow because they are still provisioning. This usually takes about a minute, depending on where you are, where's your default region. So if you want to initialize an instance, a fresh instance, every time that you're running your build, just make sure that it's going to take a bit longer than a minute. My recommendation is when you bootstrap VMs in this way, you do it sparingly whenever you need them, and then keep reusing that particular instance. It's taking a bit more than a minute to finish. Let's see what is the current state. Let's click this one again.
Andres, I have a question.
On. Yes.
Is it possible to create that instance through UI itself instead of through the Gradle commands?
Yes. So the default way to interact with the cloud is through this web console. But as said earlier, you have to know exactly which buttons you need to click in so that you don't miss certain information. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. You just need to learn how to use this particular tool. You also have the option to use a different version of the CLI, the command line implementation with interface, sorry, which requires you to have a specific version of Python to run. This CLI uses Python. Or you can have a build tool such as Maven or Gradle to do the job for you, so that you have different choices. Here you see that the instance is finally in green. It's available. This has not finished yet for some reason. There we go. So it has created everything we need. Let me remark what is right here. This is called the instance console connection. This particular resource that you have to create by hand on the UI, but the build tool does it for you, is the one that allows you to issue a secure shell connection to your running instance. If you don't do this, then your instance will still be available, but you won't be able to connect to it. You will still have to go to the website here. We go into instances and somewhere instance pools. No, sorry, right here. That was already there. There is this console connection that you have to create by hand. So the build tool did it for me. Once we have this, then you go to this IP address with the right username and password, and then you'll be able to connect to it. Okay. So next thing I'm going to do, now let's look into the network. No, it's not this one, sorry. Let's go to networking, virtual cloud networks. And we have the one for sample one. And we have security lists. This is the default security list. And it lists that port 22 so that I can connect to it. This is thanks to the console connection. So that's good. Already done by the build tool. The next thing I need to do is make sure that port 4567 is also on this list. You can create an ingress rule by hand, or you can issue a step number 2 to make that happen. So we invoke a step number 2 in the build. And this one will have created already another entry. So the command line tool tells you all the different rules. So we saw earlier 22, and here's the rule for 4567. If we go back here in the console, it has already been updated. So that's pretty good. So our current instance is set up for everything that we need. Now let's create the jar and deploy it. For that, I do step number 3. And this will build the jar, copy it. We can see here a little bit in blue that this is the final jar that is going to be copied in the particular directory, home OPC. And then I run an LSLA to see all the files in this directory. And we see that the jar is there. Now let's look at the API, at the IP for this instance. Let's see, the application should not be running right now, correct? So we click on sample 1. Here's the API, the IP. And let's go to the console. I'm gonna make this, let's make it a bit bigger. And the IP is this one. The port is 4567. And the URL that we need is hello, correct? So we invoke this. Connection refused. The application is not running. If we run step 4, this should make sure that the application runs. So it runs that particular command.
Okay.
And then we issue step 4 again. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It doesn't, oh, see? That's the reason why I'm killing the process in case that I want to rerun the application. So what I actually wanted to do is this. Curl, or use a browser. It doesn't matter which kind of client you use here. And we get the answer back, hello world.
Yeah.
So the application is actually running.
Okay.
So the workflow that you use, what would I suggest you to use when you are bootstrapping or interaction with instances in your build is you create an instance at the beginning of your working day, such with a task such as step 1. And then step 2 as well, so that you have all the ports open. And then as you continue deploying and redeploying, you do step 3 and step 4 as many times as needed. Okay. If you want to do some kind of functional testing or black box testing, when you need to figure out that your application is actually, well, the instance is started from scratch, then you can run all the steps as part of your build. And of course, know that your build might take a bit longer because you are bootstrapping a brand new instance every time you run the build in CI.
So, Andres,
Andres.
yeah.
Yes.
Quick question, like can instance hold multiple applications, like end user applications?
You can run multiple applications on the instance as long as you have CPU power and memory access.
Okay.
Given that we are deploying a tiny application, it's not much memory that is being consumed here.
Right.
And Andres, another question is the destination port, right? 4567. Are there any restricted ports that we can see as a configuration that we are not allowed to use, and any of the numbers that we are allowed to use after that point?
I think that the convention in Linux is that ports under 1024 are restricted.
Okay.
And above that number, you speak anything until this is, what is it, 65355?
Yeah.
That's the limit.
Okay. Yeah.
Again, this number 5867 is just the default from Spark. If you were to use Tomcat, then it'll be 8080 or something like that.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
All right, now let me go back to the presentation. So that takes care of that particular demo. I'm glad that it didn't blow up. So what's going on in the future for this particular plugin? Well, at some point, we would like to provide tasks for every major service that you see in the OCI Java SDK. So actually, we have, I think it's about 20 services right now implemented in the plugin, but there are more than 100 services implemented in the SDK. So at some point, we want to have a one-to-one mapping. We would like to configure credential as stack input. So instead of just using the OCI file, then you can supply the tasks or the inputs directly. We want to make our releases sync up, the releases of the plugin to be as synced as or as close as possible to every release to the Java SDK, which may be a little bit of a challenge given that OCI Java SDK makes releases, as I said earlier, 1 or every 2 weeks. So they make releases very, very fast. They keep things up to date, which is quite good. And of course, provide examples for all popular microservices friendly frameworks. So, because one thing for me to say, hey, here, looks is a simple Java, Spark Java application and off you go. But if you really want to know if there's anything extra that needs to be done for a Spring Boot or Micronaut or something else, well, there's also to be an example for that. Other possibilities that can happen just because of the Java SDK itself, well, there is a Maven plugin, but someone could build an IDE integration with all the major IDEs to do auto deployments if you want to, or some other sort of integration such as the object storage. Or perhaps someone out there will be willing to write some sort of JavaFX console, so an UI, but in terms of Java, not just web, to interact with the OCI, and you will do it again by means of the Java SDK. I want to show you also the Maven plugin. The Maven plugin, I'm going to go back to the IDE, and I have a POM file here. Let me move this stuff. Here's a POM file. Make it a bit bigger. Just like any regular POM file, any Maven file that you find out there, this particular version of the application also uses Spark Java and SLF4j as before. But it's different, and it uses the OCI Maven plugin, for which you can have as many configurations as you want and many configurations elements. This is standard Maven. You can give as many executions steps as needed with any names as you want. In this case, I'm replicating the step 2 from the Gradle build. And what is different here is that I want to add a new port. This is 4568. And what is missing is a security list ID. So I can get this value from 2 places. I can get to the console here and click on network. Let's look at that again. Virtual Cloud Network. So I think there was an easier way there. Sample 1, and the OCI ID is right here. So I can copy it. Let's look at it. It ends in some kind of weird ID and ends in KOGQ. I can copy that value. But another thing that the Gradle plugin does, when it runs, it generates a file. What is it? OCI instance with the name of the instance. And these properties are all the IDs of the things that all these resources that were created. So one of them should be the security list ID. And if I look at this number, this value, this is actually a different list ID here. So let's take this one. Let's grab this value. This is the one that was created. I will copy in the Maven POM file right here. Right. And let me see if I remember correctly how to invoke this from the command line. I think this would be, and this is where the demo might blow up. Maven, OCI, you give it the name of the plugin, then give it the name. I have to give it this, step 1, I believe. No, it's the name of the goal. I want to run this one. And I believe I have to give it the invocation ID is step 2. Hopefully this is going to work. And no, it didn't find this particular one. Guess I will have to put the group ID. I didn't publish this version of the Maven plugin yet. So that's why I didn't find the short version of the Maven plugin. But if I had it right, it should have executed before. Then what this rule will do is register a new port on the list of ports that I have access to here in my security list IDs. Yeah. Of course, it's not going to work right now. And I have here the right ID that I was showing the wrong ID before. So this matches what I copied from the other file. Okay, note to self, make sure the demo works for next time. All right. So the Maven plugin, the latest version is actually version 0.2, if I'm not mistaken. Just configure the plugin like you would do, and then add as many executions for any goals that you want to have access to. So you could replicate a step 1 to a step 1 and a step 2 in Maven, just like we did with Gradle, and you can add as many other options as needed. So let me remind you that everything that we see today is open source. So not just the Maven and the Gradle plugin, which are not, by the way, they are not endorsed by Oracle in any way. These are completely separate from the company. But Oracle does produce open source project, and it's always going to be hosted on github.com/Oracle.
Mm-hmm.
If you have not contributed to open source before, let me tell you, it's quite easy. You find a problem with any of these open source projects that we saw today, of anything else that you consume today at your daily work, file a ticket. It's as easy as that. You don't have to do anything more. But if you have the time, and you have the passion, and you want to hone your skills, supply a test case or even supply a patch. Okay. But at the very least, just make sure that you file a ticket to file a feature request when you find that something is not working correctly or something is missing. This is already a lot that you can do for open source. So with this, thank you very much for listening. And well, if you have any more questions, then I will be happy to take them.
So, Andres, I have just one question from me since I've been asking in between. So, let's say for the development teams and application teams, now let's say they would have already made choice that okay, they're going with Oracle Cloud, and this presentation is really helpful on how to do the nitty-gritty details of deploying and pushing into the Oracle Cloud, right? Your application. So what I wanted, like as an advice or to everybody, right? What's one thing that application team make a choice to go to Oracle Cloud versus in comparison to Amazon AWS or Azure or something like that? Where do you see this benefit? I just want to think out loud along with you and see what you advise on
it. Well, it may be tricky, and as always, it all depends on what exactly are you looking for. If you need, let's say, just a way for running applications like this one, there is a very trivial Java application, or actually doesn't have to be a trivial application. It's a bunch of microservices or a standard web application, and the only thing that you need is a place to run things on. It's a VM. I would say pretty much any cloud provider out there will give you access to this, what you need. So there is no differentiation here. The small print in terms of what these cloud providers will provide you is the difference. If your application fits within the free tier, then you pay nothing. If it doesn't fit, then you have to figure out what are the VM requirements, so how much memory and CPU. And based on that and how much time you're going to run the application, you will know how much you have to pay. In this case, it will be a good idea for you to shop around with the different cloud providers, figure out what would be the best value provider for the money that you're willing to pay. Additional services that are provided by each cloud provider will probably tip the balance towards one or the other. If you want to have access to the Oracle database, again, you have access to the autonomous database, which gives you everything that you need. The autonomous database is not just a relational database, but also includes other persistent models such as JSON documents and column-based NoSQL and key value graph and spatial. Then that might be something to consider. Some other cloud providers give you these capabilities as well, with the different database engines. Okay. So of course you can connect everything together, but it's up to you if you want to use the same engine with different instances. Perhaps you don't have to run everything on the same instance. By same instance, I mean the database instance. And the advantage of the autonomous database or the Oracle products is you have a single point of access in terms of a SQL-like language to connect all different formats or database engines. Whereas with the other providers, you will have to use different formats and different query languages. Some developers are happy with those options. Some others will prefer a single language. So again, it's up to you to decide what works best for your team. Okay. Personally, of course, as an Oracle employee, I'm very happy you were to choose the Oracle stack, but you always have a choice. Yep.
And I'm also happy, like really looking forward to know the Graal VM, right? That is upcoming. And I would say probably that integration will also be really good with the Oracle OCI interfaces. So, right.
Right. There will eventually some integration with the Graal VM. There have been rumors going around of integration with Graal VM and the Oracle database itself. You can run Graal VM applications on top of any Oracle VM instance. So instead of a Spark Java, you can use Quarkus or Micronaut that you run on the Graal VM mode, or your own Graal VM version. It's up to you.
Nice. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks, Andres. So I think anyone people on the call, they have questions, feel free to ask. We have around 3 minutes now. We can have a couple of questions.
Yes. Does Oracle Cloud provides platform as a service kind of service or solution within what we have seen about more around infrastructure as a service, right?
It actually, yes, it provides pretty much what you expect from the others. There's actually one version in something that I was investigating quite recently in terms of the object storage, which is the one that allows you to put data or retrieve data. It has its own protocol, it has its own format, but it also provides a compatibility layer for Amazon for being installed. So if you're already an Amazon customer and you were to investigate or try out the Oracle Cloud to do this, there are some migration paths.
Okay.
All right, if looks like we don't have any more questions on the chat at this point in time. But if you happen to have any more questions at any other point in time, so let me go again and share the desktop and let's make sure that I play this. How do I move this screen out of the way? There we go. So you can reach me out at 8almiray on Twitter. My personal homepage is andresalmiray.com. You can contact me online at any time. If you have any questions regarding OCI, Oracle, Gradle, Maven, Java in general, I'm just happy to share information.
Awesome. Yeah. So thank you, Andres. Thanks a lot
Thank
for
you,
the
Andres.
session, and thank you everyone for joining the session. So we'll keep on continuing to do more such sessions, and Andres will have connected with you to have more sessions on different topics, right, and share the expertise and experience that you have with Mumbai Java user group community and overall across the world. So yeah, so thanks a lot. And the recording of this video will be available soon on the Mumbai Java user group YouTube. I will post it on the websites and also the other meetup groups and Twitter links. So yeah, keep looking for that so that people can catch up on that. So thanks a lot, Andres. Thanks, Nishan. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
everybody, and
Andres.
happy
Thank you
weekend.
again. Bye.
Stay hygienic,
Same
stay
to you.
safe, and yeah,
Bye.
be careful. All right, thanks.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.